have recommended them. I just think it's tricky with some companies to really have that.
Yeah. Interesting. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your quilting life. How often do you quilt?
As much as I can. I am going to be super honest with you. I've had a lot of computer work with the whole Modern Sewciety coming up, and or being released. There's been all of December was trying to get the back end to work and figuring it all out and how we were going to structure it. And that was a lot of computer work. So there wasn't a lot of sewing time. And that kind of went into January. And so last week, at the end of January, I cried a lot. It was just a lot of things, you know. I mean, it was just a lot of things. But I just walked away from the computer and said, I have to sew. I have to sit down. I have to make something. That is who I am to the core.
Right.
And I cannot answer another email right now. It's going to have to wait. And it was just what I needed. It was just what I needed. So I think that it is a happy balance, and sometimes it's really hard to find, but I'm in my sewing room every day, especially 5 days a week during the week when my kids are at school. Now, at 3 o'clock when I pick my kids up, I usually don't walk back in there.
Yeah.
Unless they want to walk in there. I mean, sometimes my kids go in there, and then we spend all afternoon in there, and those are awesome days, but that is not every day.
And do your kids sew at all? I don't know.
My kids do sew. My kids don't even need permission to go in there anymore. They just get what they want and sit down.
And how old were they when they started sewing?
I say that. My kids are not allowed to use my rotary cutter yet. They have been constantly sewing since kindergarten, both of them.
Mine too. We did paper piecing was our first thing when mine was 5. Because it would, you could make a pig or a owl or something, and it was really immediate gratification. So we started with paper piecing. Yeah. But that's awesome.
Well, I think one feedback that I've gotten from people, me saying that I sew with my kids, is, how did you start? I started with them on my lap and saying, do not put your finger right there. And things that kids love to do is, if you have a sewing machine that has buttons, if they put the presser foot down and up for you, or if you have a cut button for the thread.
Yeah.
That is how my children started.
That's really great.
And then it was, it progressed to them moving the fabric and teaching them that you don't push it through, that it will actually pull itself through. Those little lessons, until they just gradually started sewing by themselves. So I think that you have to let go of the fear of something's going to happen.
Totally.
And let them try, because the more that you let them try, and I will say, when they were even younger than kindergarten and they weren't sitting in my lap, I would give them a canvas and Mod Podge glue and say, here are all my fabric scraps. You're allowed to glue them on the canvas if you want to make me a quilt block.
That's really cool.
And they loved it. They loved that they got to have something that was mine, and they got to be creative. Although that they got the scissors and they got to cut the fabric, so they were being like mommy, but the danger wasn't really there when they were so little.
Yeah, no, that's such a great idea. That's really cool. I wonder, do you know of anybody? I think I have a new project for you. You totally should do something for, teaching your kids how to sew kind of thing. Because I don't know, maybe there's a lot out there like that, but it would be really cool to have lessons for, mommy and me kind of lessons on all this stuff.
I agree. That's funny that you mentioned that. 2 people have done that in the last week, and I thought they were 2 people that I'm sure are going to do an amazing job at it.
Yeah. Interesting.
And Vanessa from Crafty Gemini,
of course,
her kids are 1.
Right.
And then Mimi G, who is a huge person who makes clothing patterns. Her kids are starting to do kids sewing classes.
Really,
and I think that hers might be membership.
That's really interesting. And I think Weeks Ringel and Bill Kerr, they did a book with their kid on sewing
right.
a while back. But Yeah, I mean, I think that's so like I think it's super smart because your kid. The more your kids are mine is a teen now, and we went to a quilt. For my birthday, she willingly or sort of willingly went to a quilt retreat with me, which was really awesome.
No way, serious?
Yeah.
Oh, these are goals in my life. This is amazing.
I know. It was like 4 days in Vermont. She was so funny. So, and she was totally great about it. You know, she did her quilt and like hung out, and it was great. It was like the most meaningful birthday present ever. So,
oh, I love that. That gives me so much hope.
Yeah, right. So that's right. So, okay. So I want to also talk about like, not only do you have the podcast and the business, but you've been in quilt magazines, which is so cool. So can you tell us about that side of your life, about quilting for magazines and sort of what that's like?
That is so much fun. That all came from the podcast, connections from the podcast. I have just formed really good relationships with some of the editors, and I think the first time that I did a magazine quilt was for Michael Miller, and they needed something with cotton couture fabric. And Kate, who works for Michael Miller Fabrics, we just really hit it off, and that is who I did a lot of magazine work for. And then it just went from there. I reached out to other people and just said, this is what I can do. Do you need these kind of services? And I've had a lot of podcasts I've had several podcasts with magazine editors saying, like, it's not as hard as you think that it would be to get your work in a magazine. I think that the first step is putting yourself out there and saying, there's usually a way that you can submit an idea or a project to a magazine to see if they'll take it. And it's pretty seamless. You don't have to have the whole project done. And I think that is what a lot of people think. I think you have to have a pretty good rough idea, rough sketch, if you have EQ, which is electric quilt, the computer thing. I think that those renditions, if you can have a computer mock-up of what your quilt's going to look like, or, just pencils and paper and drawing it out works as well, just for them to get an idea. The one thing that's really kind of difficult about it is the timeline. So they work so far out in a magazine that I have submitted stuff like, hey, I have this quilt, are you interested? And then 3 months later, I'll get an email like, hey, do you still have that quilt? We're interested. So it's really kind of weird because you give up on it and then it comes back sometimes. But it's really easy to submit to a magazine, and it's really a lot of fun. It's a good way to make extra money. Magazines traditionally pay pretty well. And
what do you mean by that? So just so people understand, so like on the economic side of it, what does that mean? So if let's say you get your idea in a magazine, or they're starting to reach out, what's the, like, how does that work, the economic side of it, the logistics of that?
Well, it depends. Sometimes if you get in a good relationship with a company, they'll say, like, we need you to make a pattern with this fabric, because they're working with a fabric company, and then you come up with something so you don't really have to pay for the fabric, right? So you just make the project with that. So you don't really have a lot of money out of it. And then every magazine's different, but I mean, it's definitely a couple $100 if you make a good size quilt. Actually, it can get pretty up there with the commissions, and it's different for every magazine. So don't think that, if you submit and it's not a couple $100, they're all different. They are all different.
Right.
But they do pay you well. So what you do is, you send the quilt, you send the directions, and they usually have a technical editor that goes over your directions. And then they photograph the quilt, and then they'll send it back to you. So you get your project back. You can do whatever you want with it. You can sell it. You can keep it. You can do whatever. But then every magazine's different with the time period of a pattern. So you can, when the magazine actually publishes your pattern, sometimes it's like 6 months out, you get the rights to that pattern back and you can sell it yourself.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's very cool. Interesting.
So it's not financially, it's probably a really good thing to try if you've never tried it, because financially you're not going to miss out. You're not going to lose out at all. You're going to make a little bit of change, and you're going to have a pattern that's already done and written out. So if you wanted to sell it on your own website or whatever, you can do that after whatever the period is that they have for their magazine rights.
That's interesting. Now, how do you feel about like quilt shows or setting your like contests or like quilt shows mostly? Like, is that an important part of the quilting industry, and sort of what's your thoughts about that?
I don't really have any thoughts on it. I'm just not a perfectionist. I'm not. Do I make really well-made quilts? Yes. Do I really worry about the little things and what somebody else is going to say? No, I don't. I really don't. And I've submitted with a friend a quilt and it got rejected. And I was just like, this wasn't fun for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't fun. It was fun to make the quilt with my friend and collaborate and do that. But that is not why I do it now. I have friends who do it and that they love it. That is their personality, to read those rules and to make sure that they do everything in their quilt for those rules and see how close they can get to those rules or win. My personality is not that. I do think they're super important for our industry. I think it's fun. Like QuiltCon was the first time that I had ever really been to more of a consumer-based show, because Quilt Market I've been to, but it is more a business-based show.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think for me, QuiltCon was an eye-opener to go and see all of those quilts displayed, and then there'd be winners and to look at what the winners did. Actually, so much so that I have plans to take my whole entire family to Nashville when QuiltCon comes to Nashville next year.
Great. Yeah, I'm so psyched that it's coming close by. We have we'll be going too. I'm so psyched because it's in Pasadena this year, right? So we're not going, but we're having one of our ambassador. We'll have somebody going for us, but yeah, that's Nashville. So psyched. That's so great. So your whole family will go. That'll be super awesome.
Yeah, I think for my girls, they see what I do, and they do look at the magazines. They do look at the books that come in, but I really want them to be in that environment. It is electrifying to be at QuiltCon. It is really electrifying. You're around such talent, and you get to, it's crazy, and I want them to experience that. I actually want my husband to as well, but, I do think it's really important. It's just not personally it doesn't fit in my personality to really be competitive like that.
All right. So I have 2 more questions. One is logistical, which is blogging, mailing lists, and weekly newsletter. How important are those sorts of things to the whole business and your podcast?
I really wish that I was a lot better at blogging. Really. I have the best blog post ever in my head right before I go to bed.
Yeah.
And I've often thought about taking my laptop into the bedroom and right before I fall asleep, writing down a blog post or typing it up, because that is when I do my best thinking. I think the hard part for me is photographs. That is not my strong suit, and I almost give up on doing a blog post because I don't feel like I have these beautiful photographs to put on my website, which is my own self talking crazy stuff to myself.
Yeah.
It is. It's the silliest thing ever, but I make myself believe it. I do really like Instagram. I feel like I share a lot on Instagram, a lot more than I do my website. And I feel like that has almost replaced the blog for a lot of people.
That's really interesting. But you don't feel like but aren't you putting photographs on Instagram too? So How is that
so much easier to put them on Instagram.
Totally. I don't know. So, Cheryl Sloboda, she had this 30-day challenge blogging. You're supposed to blog every day in December. And